Hi everybody, here is your video lecture for Module 6, and in Module 6 we're going to be talking about planning instruction. So specifically how you decide what to teach and how you gather your materials. You guys actually have in this course 2 modules on planning instruction, so this is the first part and then Module 7 is actually the second part. Okay, so for Module 6 we are going to talk about the phases of learning. We're going to talk about preparing lessons. We're going to talk about something called a task analysis and how you can develop it. And then we're going to get into instructional objectives, so writing them and also measuring them. And we'll wrap it up with our summary. Here are your objectives. So first I want you guys to know why teachers need to prepare lessons in light of student needs. I want you guys to understand the learning curve and what the phases of learning tell us about where we actually need to begin our instruction. I want you guys to be familiar with the task analysis and know when it's necessary. I want you guys to understand why we can't just teach the same skill in the same way to everyone. I want you guys to know the purpose of instructional objectives, and then understand why it's recommended that you actually select a measurement strategy before you write your objective. Alright guys, so let's get started. So we're first going to talk about the phases of learning. So with the phases of learning, typically it's represented on a curve just like you guys see here. So there are 5 phases. You have the acquisition phase, the fluency phase, the maintenance, the generalization, and the adaptation. And you can see from this curve, it typically at the beginning is kind of slow and a little bit stable, and then during the fluency stage it increases significantly, and then with the maintenance and generalization and adaptation it starts to kind of slow down and become flat again. So let's talk about each of these phases and what goes into each phase. So the first phase, so here are all your phases. So first of all, let's focus on our acquisition phase. The acquisition phase is the longest phase. It's the hardest phase. It's slow, it's laborious. And whenever you teach acquisition of a skill, you emphasize accuracy. So I know at least when you're working with kids with and special ed and things like that, at least we try to do what we call errorless learning, so that they make correct responses as much as possible. So you're really trying to emphasize accuracy. This phase is really hard for students and for learners. So a lot of times they get frustrated and you hear things such as, this is stupid or this is too hard. And when you guys hear that, that means that they're having trouble with this phase, and it might be a key to kind of look at prerequisite skills and break it down a little bit farther. I know I have trouble, like we talked about this semester, with the technology, and for me, the acquisition phase of learning a new technology is really, really slow and laborious. It takes me so long to learn a new technology, and I get frustrated, and it's just hard. And then once I get to the fluency stage, once I acquire the new technology, the fluency stage goes pretty fast for me, but just in general, acquiring new skills for me, it's slow, it's laborious, and it's just hard. Once a child has acquired the skill, then you want to work on fluency. So this is when you want to work on the child emitting the skill accurately and quickly. And if it's not fluent, they're more likely to forget the skill. And so we do this a lot in the math classroom with math facts. Sorry. So they learn their math facts, and then we start doing fluency. So how many can they get within a minute? We do this with reading, sight words, things like that. And so after they acquire a skill, they've acquired it, you want to make sure that they can emit that skill quickly and accurately. Now with fluency, it doesn't really help if you do if you work on this for long periods. So you want to work on fluency in small doses of dispensed practice. And that just goes back to your memory research, just in general. Even when you guys are studying, instead of spending one night cramming for an exam, it's better to study for a little bit each day. So those small doses of dispersed practice result in the child being able to remember the information more, and that fluency being more likely to be quickly and accurate. Okay, after they have gotten the skill to fluency, now we have the maintenance phase. And so this is when the progress starts to kind of level off. You can see it in your curve. And this is when you want to make sure that they remember it even though they're not practicing it every day. So the practice is intermittent, and the feedback and the frequency decreases. So with your acquisition and your fluency, you're giving lots of feedback and reinforcement. But with the maintenance phase, that kind of teeters off, and it kind of starts to fade out. And so you're going to practice a skill, but maybe not every day, maybe every once in a while, just to make sure that the skill is maintained with brief breaks. The second to last phase is your generalization phase. So this is when you want to make sure that the child can use the skill in different settings with different people around. So if the child can do their math facts in the classroom, that doesn't really help them in real life. So you want them to be able to do their math facts at home and everything like that. You also want them to be able to apply it to the real world. So, if they know that 2 + 2 = 4, well, when they get home, can they actually look at, 2 cans of vegetables and 2 cans of peas and 2 cans of green beans and know that they have 4 cans of vegetables? So you want it to be able to generalize to other representations of stimuli, essentially, and you want them to be able to apply it in the real world. Now, this doesn't happen automatically. So in the classroom, you have to program for generalization. You have to incorporate it into your lesson plans. And we'll talk about that in the future with the course. You guys have a chapter on promoting generalization or planning for generalization and establishing it. So just know that that has to happen in the classroom. And that's why I go back to the math concept, but a lot of math worksheets, they don't just say 2 + 2. You have 2 fish, 2 pictures of fish plus 2 pictures of fish, and that equals 4. So those are ways that we plan for generalization and real-world application. The last step is the adaptation step, or the adaptation phase. And this is when they can actually use a skill and be creative with it, and they can adapt it to different situations. They can invent new methods of using the skill. I always think, when I go through all these phases, I think about the people that sign up to be on, the first example that comes to my mind is American Idol. So they've learned how to play the guitar and how to sing. They do that, they acquire that skill, they do it to fluency so they can do it quickly and accurately. They practice it over time intermittently so they maintain their skills. They're able to play not only in their room where they learned how to play the guitar and how to sing, but in different venues and to play different songs. And then they learn to start to get creative with their songs. And so I can't remember his exact name, but one of the winners of American Idol a long time ago when the show first started, he played Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, but he did a really slow version, and it was so creative and interesting. And that's what we mean by the adaptation phase. Okay, so why can't we just teach the same skill in the same way to everyone? And if we could do that, that would be great, but that's not typically what happens. So it's up to you to figure out where your students are in these phases of learning and to design your lesson plan to meet whatever phase they're in. If you pick a phase that's ahead of them, then it's too difficult and they're going to break down and they're not going to learn, and you're going to see they're going to get really frustrated and you're going to see a lot of behavior problems. If you pick a phase that's too easy, they oftentimes get bored and they lose momentum and you get behavior problems that way. So picking the phase of learning that individual students are on is really important for your lesson planning. You don't want it to be too difficult, or you don't want it to be too easy. And here are some questions that you guys can ask yourself to determine the phase of learning for a student. So, if they're in the acquisition phase, has the behavior been observed, or can the student perform the skill when prompted? So if they've acquired the skill, cool. Does the behavior occur quickly and easily without any delay when prompted? So can you ask a kid, hey, what's 2 times 2? Can he answer 4 really quickly? That's your fluency. Does the behavior maintain fluency even after extended periods of time without instruction? So, every week can you go in and say, hey, what's 2 times 2? And the kid says 4. And you don't ask him again. You come back next Monday. What's 2 times 2? The kid says 4. Then you're good with maintenance. Does the behavior occur in novel settings with other people at different times and under different circumstances? So does the kid answer what's 2 times 2 when his parents ask him? Or if you don't actually have the numbers 2 times 2, if he has dots and he sees 2 dots times 2 dots, and it just looks a little different, did it generalize to other stimuli and things like that? And then can the student adapt the skill in untrained ways when necessary? And that's that adaptation. So you can go through each of these questions and kind of figure out what phase your learner is in. Okay, when you guys prepare your lessons, it's really important, like I stated, to figure out what phase they're in. And so just like we talked about earlier, if you try to teach acquisition of a skill without having taught the prerequisite steps, then it's a prescription for failure, boredom, and misbehavior. So, I was talking earlier in general with regards to the different phases. But with the skill, especially when we focus on this acquisition phase, if you're trying, sorry, I have some weird animations. If you're trying to teach a skill and you haven't taught the prereqs, then you're going to have a really hard time with that acquisition phase. It's already long, it's already hard at the beginning. So you can set the student up for success by ensuring that they have all those prerequisite steps. Okay, so how do you do that? If you have a skill, first of all, your first task is to identify sub-skills of that skill. So think about triple-digit addition, okay, right here. Can you guys think about different ways to break it down? You have to know the knowledge of place value. You have to know single-digit addition without grouping. You have to know single-digit addition with grouping. You have to know, and are there any other, I guess, what do you guys think are the other ones? See if you guys can kind of think about it and fill it out. Summarizing a reading passage. What are the sub-skills? Letter identification is one. Letter-sound correspondence. Decoding single syllable words. Sight word recognition. Fluency reading. Comprehension of words. Ability to recall simple information. The ability to discriminate important facts from details. So, these skills that we think might be really easy to us, they can be hard to students. And so it might be that you need to break it down and figure out, okay, what are the sub-skills? What prerequisite skills does a child need to be successful? Remember, we always want to set the child up for success. So if we're in the acquisition phase and you're teaching reading a passage and the child's having difficulty and you hear those things like, this is stupid, I hate doing this, go back and break it down into the sub-skills and figure out what are the prereqs and does a child actually have the prereqs. And then you can go through the phases of learning with each of the prereqs as well. So when is a task analysis necessary? And a task analysis, so basically taking those skills and breaking them into subcomponents is what we call a task analysis. And this happens all the time in life in general. You guys see directions. We have GPS systems that break our destination into turn right, turn left here. If you like to cook, you can think about a recipe. So it breaks it down into a task analysis, and we follow the task analysis and bake our cake or whatever it is we're baking. Putting things together as well. It gives us a task analysis to put things together. Task analysis can be verbal, they can be written, anything like that. But basically, you need a task analysis when you have a complex skill that needs to be broken down into small teachable steps. And effective teachers, if you need to do this effectively, use a task analysis as the basis for planning instruction. So you don't just plan your instruction and then when you decide that the kid doesn't have the skill, go backwards. This is something you do like we talked about in Module 5 on the front end, and you figure out where the child is in the phases of learning and if they need a task analysis for complex skills, and you use that as the basis for planning your instruction. So this isn't an after-the-fact thing. This is something that you consider before, and you use it to plan your instruction or your lessons. All right, during planning, you need to think through all the tasks that will be required and how you're actually going to teach those tasks. And there's different ways to do a task analysis. So I'm going to go through kind of the three main ways. And like I said, this happens during your planning period. So you need to plan to take these complex steps, break them down into a task analysis, and figure out how you're going to teach each of these steps. The first one is a task difficulty. So this is when you do the easiest to hardest skill to achieve acquisition. So I think that one of the good examples of task difficulty is long division. So with long division, it has 4 subcomponents. You have to divide, subtract, bring down, which is your place value, and then multiply. Well, if you teach those in order, you're going to have to teach to divide before you teach to subtract. And first you probably want to do place value and then subtract and then multiply and then divide. So instead of teaching them in order, you're going to teach the easiest step and then the next easiest step, or the next harder step, the next harder, and then the hardest step, and then you'll put it all together. So, how to raise your hand. First, you want to teach keep elbow straight, hold your hand still, put it in the air, and then hold your hand in place. So you teach the easiest skill all the way up to the hardest, and then you put them together. The temporal way is teaching them in order. So step-by-step sequence for the acquisition of the entire skill. So when to raise a hand, know when you want to say something, raise your hand, look at the teacher, and wait quietly for the teacher. So, and then the last way to do this is the criterion. So you use this to build up that fluency and that maintenance. So he's doing it, use it in the acquisition phase to, use it in the acquisition phase to make sure that they continue to engage in the behavior at the appropriate time. So talking about raising your hand, how much to raise your hand? Well, if you've taught him the skill, you taught the easy way first, and then now you've taught the temporal way to do it, and now he's doing it 50% of opportunities. Well, now you're going to increase that to 60%, to 70, 80, 90. So now the child is reliably raising their hand. So basically you start off with task difficulty, teaching easiest to hardest. Then you go into temporal, the step-by-step sequence. Okay, so whenever you guys are in your planning period, you need to think through all the tasks that will be required and how. Okay, so now let's talk about preparing your lessons. When you prepare your lessons, it's really important to prepare your lessons in light of student needs. And that's important because when you're trying to teach acquisition of a skill, if you are teaching a complex skill and that person does not have the prerequisite steps, then from the beginning, you're going to have failure, boredom, and misbehavior. When you present a complex task and that child does not have the prerequisite steps, I said, they get bored, they start to misbehave, they think it's hard, they think it's stupid. And so you get all those things that we get in the acquisition phase. Remember, the acquisition phase is long and hard just to start off with. So ensuring that you identify prerequisite steps and you teach those prerequisite steps sets the kid up for success. if you're trying to teach a complex skill and that child doesn't have the prerequisite steps, then you're going to have a really, really difficult time, and it's going to be kind of miserable. So let's talk about prereqs. And so let's take triple digit addition. And I want you guys to think about triple digit addition and try to identify some sub-skills. So first, you might have to have knowledge of place value. You might have to have single digit addition without grouping. You might have to have single digit addition with grouping. And see if you guys can think of some other ones just on your own. Any other sub-skills that you can identify. What about summarizing a reading passage? It might sound easy at the beginning, but think about some sub-skills. What are prereqs that you need to be able to summarize a reading passage? You might need letter identification, letter sound correspondence, decoding single syllable by words, sight recognition, fluency reading words, short phrases, sentences, comprehension of words read, ability to recall simple information, your 5 W's, the ability to discriminate important facts from details. And so when you're looking at that, that's a lot that goes into, or a lot of sub-skills that you need to be able to summarize a reading passage. And if your kids haven't gone through the stages of learning on each of these sub-skills, then teaching them to summarize a reading passage is going to be really hard. So whenever we break skills down into those little subcomponents, that's what we call a task analysis. And we have task analysis all the time in life. So you guys might have a GPS. Whenever they break it down to turn right here, turn left here, that's a task analysis. Cooking, if you guys like to cook. So reading steps from a recipe to bake a cake, that's a task analysis. Putting furniture together, the instructions is an example of a task analysis. So when is a task analysis necessary? And it's necessary when a complex skill needs to be broken down into small teachable steps. And to be an effective teacher, you use this task analysis as the basis for planning your instruction. So you don't go in there and try to teach this complex skill and go backwards. You use this task analysis at the beginning and ensure that your kid has all of these prereqs before you teach that complex skill, essentially. And we talked about those questions regarding to what phase the kid is in. So you can kind of ask those questions and go through each step of the task analysis to figure out where your learner is within the analysis. So during planning, I said this needs to happen during your planning period, not after the fact. But during planning, you're going to think through all the tasks that you need to teach and how you're going to teach them. And they've identified kind of 3 different ways to teach a task analysis. The first step is you're going to look at each of your tasks in your task analysis and teach the easiest to the hardest. So look at your task difficulty. We talk about how to raise a hand. You can break it down into keeping your elbow straight, holding the hand still, putting the hand in the air, and holding the hand in place. And you want to teach the easiest one first. So teach that first, and then teach the harder one, and then the hardest one. After you've done that, you want to make sure you teach a temporal sequence, so a step-by-step sequence for acquisition of the entire skill. So you've taught the person how to raise their hand. Now you need to teach them when to raise the hand. So know when you want to say something, raising the hand, looking at the teacher, and waiting quietly for the teacher. After you've got that temporal sequence down, then you want to make sure that it's happening at the correct opportunities, and it's happening when it's supposed to happen. So this is your fluency part. So at first, if it's happening 50% of the time, then you want to move your criterion up to 60. Once it's happening 60, you move up to 70, and then you move it up to 80, and then 90. So this is how you kind of think through all the tasks and how each will be accomplished. So give you guys an example of each of those. And then you can figure out where your instruction begins as where the child is in your task analysis. So if you look at this picture, here are your teaching steps. So the first step is to make eye contact with the teacher and wait quietly. Wait for teacher's signal. So this is lining up. Move to the line and be straight. Line up straight and quietly. So that's kind of your task analysis. And we see that the student does make eye contact with the teacher. The student does wait for the signal, but the student is not moving to the line. So moving to the line, you can break that into its own task list or task analysis and break it down into sub-skills. So stand up when prompted, push in chair, walk directly to the line, and stand at the end. But when you break that down, we see that the student stands up, the student pushes their chair, but the student's not walking directly to the line. And that's where your instruction should begin. So take your skill, figure out your teaching steps, figure out where it breaks down within the child following the directions. And that's where you need to do your task analysis. You need to assess each of those and figure out where you need to start in your task analysis to start teaching. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about are instructional objectives. So instructional objectives are the full descriptions of the steps in the task list. So this is, with each step in your task list, what are you going to teach, who are you going to teach it to, under what conditions, and how much is enough to consider the skill mastered. So all this is kind of coming into play with your acquisition, your fluency, your generalization, everything like that. So whenever you write each step of your task list, you need to have what we call an objective. And typically, you're going to have short-term objectives and long-term objectives. So your short-term objectives are typically going to be an instructional objective for each item in your task list. And then your long-term objective is typically that complex skill. So when you look at what to teach to whom, under what conditions, and how much is considered skill, how much is enough to consider the skill mastered, you're going to write it like this. So the first thing you're going to see are the conditions, then you're going to see the student learner, then you're going to see the behavior, and then you're going to see the criterion. So this goes back also with, talking about being able to define behavior and measure it and keep up with it and provide feedback and things like that. So when you write objectives like this, they're observable, they're measurable, they're written in positive terms, they're clear, they're concise, they're complete. It ensures that everybody's on the same page, that you know what's expected from the student knows what it's expected from them, and it's very easy to define and keep on track and teach that skill. So let's look at each of these. The first thing you need to do is identify the learner. So John will, the fourth graders will, participants in the training program will, things like that. And then you're going to identify the target behavior. Remember, we've talked about defining target behaviors. You need to use observable terms, measurable terms, positive terms, and they need to be clear, concise, and complete. Usually you want to use action verbs because action verbs you can directly observe. And we talked about that before in defining behavior. And avoid ambiguous terms. So you want to say that John will recognize the difference between big and small, will point to the largest item, will understand the value of coins, will verbally count. Verbally count, those are all action verbs. Recognize, point, will remain on task, will look at his book or the speaker. Look at, those are things that you can actually see and observe and measure. So those are those action verbs. Then you want to identify the conditions of the intervention. So when asking Sam to point to a little car, what is he going to do? When instructing Judy to go back to, probably should be her desk. When instructing Susie to draw a line from each word to its definition. In the cafeteria, it could be materials being used. So when completing a worksheet with 20-digit addition problems, Sam will, blah, 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 blah. Environmental stimuli. In the cafeteria, John will, whatever it is. During independent work time, Allison will. During transition between classes. And then also the manner of assistance is also in the condition. Is the person doing this independently with the aid of a calculator with partial physical assistance from the teacher? So these are what we call those antecedents when we talk about the ABCs of the behavior. What are the conditions of the intervention? When do you want the behavior to occur, essentially? And then what's the criteria for acceptable performance? How do we know that the skill is mastered? And this is what needs to be measurable. So, well, the behavior needs to be observable and measurable. So that way we can identify a criteria. Is it going to be 17 out of 20 correct responses on math problems? We talked about when completing a worksheet with 20-digit additional problems, John will answer the questions correctly, or will answer 17 out of 20 correct responses, something like that. Label all 10 objects correctly. They will engage in this behavior with 80% accuracy. They'll answer correctly on 80% of opportunities. 4 out of 5 trials correct, but they'll complete all steps in the toilet training program independently. So this shows us, okay, this is the criteria that we know that the kid needs to meet for that objective to be mastered. So 4 things that need to go into your components, into your objectives: the learner, the behavior, the conditions, and the criterion. And if you guys remember at the front, first the conditions are listed, then the learner, then the behavior, and then the criterion. So I have some examples for you guys with objectives. So I want us to go through each of these and identify the learner, the behavior, the conditions, and the criterion. So like I said earlier, the conditions are typically listed first. So, and I'm actually going to do this part so I can write on it. Okay, so first, like I said, typically the conditions are listed. So it's typically at the beginning. So these are the conditions. Given a 15-minute period and an array of objects to manipulate, these are the conditions under which the intervention is to occur. Tabitha, this is our learner, will bring her hand to her mouth no more than a total. So now we're looking for our behavior. Our behavior is will bring her hand to her mouth no more than a total of 3 minutes for 3 consecutive sessions. So this is our criterion. This is how we know when she brings her hand to her mouth no more than a total of 3 minutes for 3 consecutive sessions. That's how we know the objective is mastered. Okay, let's look at this one. First should typically be, okay, so when 2 photographs are held in front of Ed and he is asked to show me the blank, he will, okay, so this is basically our conditions. These are the instructions, the antecedents. Our learner is Ed, so we got our learner right there, and then I point to the correct picture. So this is the behavior that we need him to engage in, and then he needs to do that 80% of the trials over a 1-month period for each of the 4 pictures for us to say that this objective is correct. So this is a criterion at the end. But given 36 known grocery terms and 8 grocery store department printed flashcards, Rob will independently match all grocery items to the appropriate grocery store department, 100% correct for 3 consecutive sessions. So our conditions under which the intervention is occurring is, here's our materials, and he gets the known grocery items and the grocery store flashcards. So those are our conditions. And also independently would also kind of be a condition as well. Rob, that's our learner, will independently, so we want him to match all grocery items to the appropriate store department. That's our behavior. And then for us to say that he has mastered this behavior, our criterion is 100% correct for 3 consecutive sessions. So these are all really good instructional objectives. Each of the components are in there. We have the learner, the behavior, the condition, and the criterion. Okay. So up here. All right, guys. When monitoring or measuring your objectives, this is when that measurement system comes into play. And we talked about these frequency recording, duration recording, latency, things like that. And so you have to be really careful in how you decide to measure the behavior. And so your criteria that you use is going to tell you what and how you're going to measure it. So it's going to tell you if you're measuring frequency, and are you measuring it continuously? Are you measuring it discontinuously? So make sure that whatever you're measuring is practical for you to measure. So if you use a criterion such as 100 times per school day, then you've told us that you are using a continuous measurement system and you're observing the whole school day. So you need to make sure that you can do that. It's practical for you to do that. If you use a criterion, the person will engage in some sort of behavior 80% of the time. You've indicated that you're monitoring that behavior 100% of the day. So be careful with your criterion. If you're only monitoring that person for an hour, you might want to say, we'll engage in the behavior 80% of the 1 hour lunchtime or the 30-minute lunchtime, whatever it is. If you can watch them the whole lunchtime, then cool. So just make sure that you consider frequency recording. Make sure that you're not saying per school day if you can't watch the whole day. So you might want to select a period of time. You might want to do opportunity recording. So if you present the kid with opportunities, how many times does he engage in the behavior, the correct behavior? Be careful with duration. Make sure that you specify a time period. Okay. Latency recording as well. Make sure that you can actually measure the latency for the behavior to occur. You might need to use indirect measures such as permanent product recording. So, if you're looking at how many math problems he does, well, you can look at his math worksheet at the end of the day. That behavior has left a permanent product, a tangible product in the environment, so you can record that way. So make sure that your recording system is practical and that you can actually record and measure the behavior like you state in the criterion. So just be careful of that aspect. Okay, I want you guys to think about some things this week. If you're working with a kid or in your everyday observations, if you guys are ever around little kids or learners or anything like that, and they're having trouble, think about what kind of deficit the person's having. Is it a skill deficit or a performance deficit? If it's a skill deficit, you might be able to animations are off. Break it down and do that task analysis. If it's a performance deficit, maybe you need to do some fluency training or things like that. What skill is needed to do or not to do the problem behavior? So what skill do they have all the prereq skills to engage in an appropriate behavior? What is a more appropriate behavior? Can the skill be broken down into smaller steps? Can you create a task analysis? And then what behavior do you want to see instead of the problem behavior? So when you have a problem behavior, what behavior do you want them to engage in? So those are all great things to think about when you're thinking about why is this kid engaging in a problem behavior? Is it because the task that I'm asking him to do is too complex? Can I break it down? Do we need the prereqs? Is he doing it, but he's just not fluent in it, and I'm asking him to generalize when he hasn't actually mastered fluency and maintenance and things like that. So think about all those. All right, so to summarize, we talked about phases of learning: acquisition, fluency, maintenance, generalization, and adaptation. We talked about identifying sub-skills and developing that task analysis. We talked about ways to teach the task analysis, task difficulty, so teach the easy step first and then the more difficult one, and then the temporal aspects of it, so making sure they go in order temporally. And then the criterion or the fluency part of it, making sure that they can engage in the behavior up until fluency. And then we talked about objectives. So for an objective to be complete, you need to have the learner, the behavior, the conditions, and the criteria in there. And then make sure that your criteria, you can actually measure it and it's practical. So alright guys, that's it for Module 6. So if you guys have any questions when you're going through this, then please let me know. Thanks guys.